Hello, everyone. My name is Morris Venegas. Thank you very much for coming to this talk. I'm a PhD candidate at Northeastern University working with Dr. Chin Feng. And today we'll be talking about MOCA, a general approach to design, optimize, analyze modular fNIRS probes. So functional near-infrared spectroscopy, or fNIRS, is a neuroimaging technique that utilizes near-infrared light placed on the surface of the scalp to detect brain activation by measuring the associated hemodynamics. Traditionally, fNIRS systems require the use of headgears attached to cart-sized optical units via optical fibers, requiring the patient to be immobile and confined. So this restraint in mobility has been recently addressed by portable fNIRS systems. However, the vast extent of functions to be studied in natural environments are still limited by two main challenges of portable systems. One, these systems still rely on fiber optic cables, making them expensive and fragile. And two, since we now have a vast array of brain functions and sites to study, we require individual specialized headgear designs for every specific task. Enter modularity. Modular fNIRS architectures, systems consisting of repeating source and detector circuits, have received increasing attention in recent years due to their portability, scalability, and flexibility in probe design. However, modular head probes can quickly become very complex, especially for full head coverage, since the final probe depends on many design and experimental specific parameters, such as the module shape, the module size, the number of modules, the number of sources and detectors within a single module, the layout of all these optodes, each module's orientation, and the total area of coverage. Now, although software tools do exist to optimize the location of optodes, they tend to focus on the individual source and detector locations and generally do not support modular features. There's a lack of a systematic method to either analyze probes made up of different layouts of the same repeating modules or to compare modular systems comprised of different module designs used over the same region. In this talk, we introduce MOCA, our Modular Optode Configuration Analyzer, a MATLAB-based systematic approach to designing fNIRS modules that takes in user-defined design parameters and derives quantitative metrics. This tool allows the fNIRS community to do two very important things. It helps optimize configurations of existing modular probes, and it provides a method to compare complex full head probes composed of vastly different elementary fNIRS modules. In this Zoom talk, we'll first dig into the details of MOCA workflow, and then I'll guide you through two examples highlighting these two use cases. Let's begin with inputs. Users first need to define the shape and dimensions of the elementary module. There are four to choose from, and each geometry is a shape heavily studied in literature. And we chose these shapes to be able to compare these types of systems. Other shapes were chosen for their ability to tessellate 3D surfaces. And personally, our lab is investigating a diamond-shaped fNIRS module. So I invite you to come to my other talk at 2:30 p.m. Eastern today to hear more details of our diamond module. MOCA simplifies a region of interest into a 2D area defined by a width and a height, which surprisingly allows you to analyze a small patch, a band, or a flattened full head probe. And a user must then specify the quantity of optodes and their locations on the elementary module. Here we've replicated the module geometry and optode layout of some published module designs. Finally, MOCA needs to know the maximum source detector separation allowable for the probe. Typically, this is set to somewhere between 30 and 40 millimeters, but it is heavily dependent on the performance of the type of optodes chosen for your system. For example, we used a max value of 30 millimeters for the analysis of our diamond module since it balanced the inversely proportional curves of signal to noise ratio and brain sensitivity as source detector separation increased. Now, once the inputs are defined, MOCA will tessellate the elementary module throughout the region of interest and assign an index. For non-equiangular shapes or when the optode layout is not symmetric, MOCA will perform an exhaustive search and produce an orientation value for each module. Varying the orientation has an effect on the output metrics. So now let's describe the output by using this module design in particular as an example. Here, we tessellate an area with the module geometry and return the number of modules needed for the region of interest. MOCA will then overlay the optode layout onto each of those modules to produce the final probe. And the total number of optodes is simply the number of optodes on a single module multiplied by the number of modules in the probe. Next, it'll find all the source and detector pairs in the probe with separations below the max source detector separation. And MOCA produces a spatial channel distribution plot for visual interpretation of channel density over the region of interest. Each line here represents a channel, and its color represents the source detector separation. We can also view the channels as a histogram, separated by intra and inter-module channels. Intra-module channels are simply the channels within a module, whereas inter-module channels are channels where the sources and detectors are on different modules. Think international flights. Now, MOCA calculates the brain sensitivity for each channel based on a 5-layer infinite slab model and computes the average brain sensitivity for the entire probe. In MOCA, white and gray matter layers are considered part of the brain, and short separation channels are excluded in the average since, well, by definition, these channels are meant to only sample superficial layers. A spatial channel distribution plot with color representing brain sensitivity is used to visually inspect areas of high depth penetration. For example, this probe has an empty space in the center. However, we see from the spatial distribution plot that this area has high brain sensitivity where intermodule channels are used. Finally, MOCA will automatically determine the number of spatial multiplexing groups of the probe and assign each source to a group. Spatial multiplexing takes advantage of the low SNR at large source detector separations to turn multiple sources on at the same time to increase the sampling rate of high density probes. These are the first 3 source groupings of this probe in particular. The radius of each circle represents the max source detector separation inputted. So, in a nutshell, that is MOCA, a generalized workflow that helps design modular fNIRS probes. It takes in user-specified module parameters, and it produces outputs such as channel counts, brain sensitivity, and sampling rate metrics. Now, let's go through 2 examples to see its potential. Example 1, optimizing existing modules. If I have this module in particular, then I have 8 total intramodule channels. I design a 2x2 probe for my region of interest, and that gives me 8 times 4 intramodule channels, as shown by this MOCA's histogram. Additionally, I now have intermodule channels too. This adds to the total channel distribution of a probe, and it produces the spatial brain sensitivity prop. Pretty straightforward, right? Now let's see if we can improve on this probe. If we do the same 2x2 layout, but this time I reorient the modules by rotating each one 90 degrees, I end up with the same intra-module channel distribution. And that makes sense since the shape and optical layout of the modules haven't changed. But intermodule channel separation distribution has changed. And it now looks like this. And our spatial brain sensitivity plot looks like this. So a big deal, right? Well, by simply reorienting the modules, MOCA shows that we obtain a larger number of channels around the 30 millimeter source detector range, which is a typical range used for fNIRS. Additionally, the average brain sensitivity of the probe increased from 9.83% to 10.34%. Simply put, MOCA allowed us to design a better probe off of an existing module, all without changing the design or the number of modules. Now let's do a second example and compare across different fNIRS module designs. Here we use 4 different shapes described earlier, with the opto layouts being variations of some published modules, but not exact. For this comparison, the module dimensions were set to minimize the difference in area between all 4 shapes. The region of interest is the same for all of them, and it represents the average surface area of a head of an adult male. The max channel separation is 40 millimeters, and orientation changes aren't allowed. So let's take a look at the outputs. The channel distribution for the diamond module probe shows that the probe favors source detector separations between 25 and 35 millimeters. If we look at all 4 modules, although the highest number of channels resulted from the hexagon-based probe, it utilized the highest number of total optos and the second highest number of total modules, which may increase a probe's total cost, especially if sensitive detectors are used in the design. The hexagon-based probe also resulted in the lowest percentage of total intermodule channels. A lower percentage of these motion-susceptible channels can be used as a marker of expected robustness of a probe's readings. Now here we see the spatial brain sensitivity plot for the triangle modular-based probe. The results show that the average brain sensitivity remained above 11% for all the shapes except the hexagonal probe. When we look at the average brain sensitivity due to only intra-module channels, the square, hexagon, and diamond-based probes show that using both intra and intermodule channels together increases the probe's brain sensitivity compared to only using intramodule channels. Now, this is not the case for the triangle-based probe. For the triangle-based probe, the use of intramodule channels has very little effect on the probe's overall brain sensitivity. And thus a possible recommendation would be to simply use only intramodule channels for a higher sampling rate when working with this particular probe. This GIF shows the first 10 spatial multiplexing groups of the hexagon module-based probe. Now, MOCA showed that the square module has 33% fewer multiplexing groups than all other modules. Spatial multiplexing is an indicator for a probe's sampling rate. Thus, we can infer that the full head probe composed of square modules will likely have the fastest sampling rate of all the modules if spatial multiplexing strategy is implemented. Now, I do want to give a caveat that this is just one example comparison. To emphasize MOCA's capabilities, we made slight variations off of published optode layouts for each module in the comparison. And we're not reporting an optimal layout or shape, nor are we directly stating that any published design is suboptimal or lacking in some way. So please run MOCA on your own designs. Some future work. Spatial multiplexing doesn't require extra hardware, but it does require prior knowledge of the location of all optodes and individually addressable sources. This may not be possible for all modular systems. We are working towards the ability to tessellate more complex areas, both in 2D and 3D spaces. Brain sensitivity depends on the region of interest of the head, and the average value may change when we implement Atlas-based brain sensitivity. Now, finally, we currently export X and Y values for each source and detector on the global 2D axis. We plan to implement relationships to channels such as springs and dampers to represent intra and intramodule channels, similar to the spring relaxation method of Atlas Viewer. That way, users who design modules in MOCA can output their probes for use in their preferred data analysis software. So with that, I'd like to give a special thanks to our funding sources, to my advisor, Dr. Fang, and to my lab members for being soundboards for ideas. I truly appreciate you. Please feel free to email me if you want to virtually grab coffee or tea. Thank you very, very much for listening, and please stay safe out there.